As many of you are aware, this past year, I've been participating in a community studies program offered by Meadville Lombard Theological School. And as part of this community studies program, I was required to spend approximately 8 hours a week over the course of 2 semesters volunteering at a local nonprofit organization, ideally one working with a population with whom I had little previous experience and previous exposure. When I learned of the program requirements, I knew immediately which local organization I wanted to work with, and that was L'Arche Jacksonville. Prior to this year, I had very little direct knowledge of L'Arche. I knew that our church hosted an annual dance for L'Arche every September, and I had attended a few of those, and I really enjoyed getting to meet the folks from L'Arche at those events, but honestly, that wasn't the primary reason I wanted to go to L'Arche. The reason that L'Arche interested and intrigued me so much was because of the witness and testimony of David Keel. I don't know if there is any greater ambassador for the work and ministry of L'Arche than David. In several conversations over the past years, David often talked with me about his connection to L'Arche, how much it meant to him personally. And if you've ever had the joy of talking with David about L'Arche, then you know that there is an excitement and a passion and a love that absolutely radiates from David whenever he discusses that community. That genuine enthusiasm from a man that I respect so much, it meant a lot to me. So I made a promise to myself that I would someday connect with L'Arche myself. And when the Meadville Community Studies program came up, I knew that I had found my perfect opportunity. So a little bit of background for L'Arche, for those of you who don't know about it. The L'Arche story began around 1964 when Canadian philosopher Jean Vanier invited 2 men with intellectual disabilities to leave an institution and live with him in a house in a small French village. Over time, Vanier invited others to join him. He named the home L'Arche, which is French for the Ark, a reference to that floating symbol of salvation from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. It wasn't long before L'Arche communities, homes where people with intellectual disabilities lived in intentional communities side by side with non-disabled people, it wasn't long before those L'Arche communities began popping up like wildflowers all over the world. Today, L'Arche Jacksonville is one of over 140 L'Arche communities spread across approximately 40 countries and 6 continents. The mission tab of L'Arche Jacksonville's website contains these words. We believe that by creating an environment where people with intellectual and physical disabilities can share their gifts, we are effecting a positive change in the world. We believe that these shared gifts have the power to transform the lives of those who are open to receiving them. We celebrate the unique value of every person and recognize our need for one another. We resolve to explore and appreciate the diverse cultures and faith practices within L'Arche and to work together toward a more evolved and caring human society. It's beautiful. L'Arche Jacksonville is comprised of 5 group homes spread across a small campus just down the road from us by Christ the King Catholic Church. Now, when I began volunteering there, I was assigned to work primarily at one house, the Peace House. And the other houses have similarly evocative names like Grateful House or Prayer House, Sunflower House. Peace House has 5 core members, that is, individuals with disabilities, and several assistants without disabilities. And over the past year, from October through April, I spent 2 days a week volunteering primarily at the Peace House, banking over 160 total hours there. So a good question is, what exactly did I do during those hours? And the truth is, I'm not entirely sure. It's kind of hard to say. Time flows differently at L'Arche, I think, than in the rest of the world. L'Arche isn't like, say, Habitat for Humanity. At Habitat, you could spend your time building something tangible that you can later point to and say, hey, I helped to build those 5 homes. The time I spent at L'Arche did not result in concrete and tangible monuments that I can display for anyone. Nevertheless, I believe the work that happens at L'Arche is no less substantial. And frankly, Any impact that I may have left on the residents of L'Arche is minuscule as compared to the impact that the residents of L'Arche have made on me. But to answer that question, what exactly did I do with all the time I spent at Peace House? The best answer, I think, is this. I shared a small but precious sliver of life with some of the most amazing people I have ever met. We ate dinner together. We prayed together. We read books together. We gardened together. We shopped together. We did chores together. We cooked together. We celebrated milestones together, hung Christmas lights together. Sharing these little precious pieces of life fed my soul in ways that I could have never possibly imagined. So like David Keel and many other UUCJers before me, I have absolutely fallen in love with L'Arche. And though my community studies program through Meadville is over, it is my full intention to continue to visit regularly L'Arche and the Peace House, assuming the Peace House folks are okay with me coming over. Is that okay? Thank you. Speaking of that community studies program, my final assignment was to answer a question related to my experience at L'Arche. The question was this: what are you grateful to have experienced and to have been challenged by this past year? It was a truly daunting question. Daunting because I was blessed to experience so very, very much in my short time at L'Arche. But after some reflection on that question, I decided the most meaningful way that I could answer would be to write all I had learned this year from each of the 5 core members of the Peace House. So I wrote about each of them, what each of them taught me this year, what gifts they wittingly and unwittingly shared with me, and how they challenged my ways of understanding and engaging the disabled community. This became a very powerful and a very personal assignment for me. It's probably the most profoundly moving homework I have ever had to complete in my life. As I reflected on my time with each of the Peace House residents, I was moved with gratitude for the manner in which they had invited me into their home and allowed me to share in their lives. After I completed the write-up, I thought to myself that I would like to find a way, a venue to express my gratitude and share all that I had learned directly with the members of the Peace House. And because I believe the lessons I learned there are so important and so generally applicable and accessible to all of us, I decided to invite the Peace House residents, along with their other friends at L'Arche, here to my church, so that I could honor them and lift them up in front of my other community, my spiritual community, my congregation here at UUCJ. So this morning, I'm going to address each Peace House resident individually. I'm going to share a little bit about what makes them so special, and then what I learned from them this year. So I'm going to start with Joy, and Joy is the lovely lady seated right here in the beautiful flower dress. She always wears the nicest clothes and the most beautiful jewelry. That is Joy. Joy, I think you are a prophet. I think she said that's right. She has no problem telling it like it is. There's no pretense with Joy. Joy's wit and tongue are both razor sharp, and her comedic timing is perfect. And actually, I think that's what allows her to get away sometimes with saying things that normally most people would get into trouble for saying. For example, when Joy is confronted with something that perhaps she doesn't care much for, she will often eye you askance. In other words, she gives you that side eye. And then she'll utter with perfect comedic timing some oftentimes colorful expletive that I probably can't repeat here in church. But you can't get upset with her because you're doubled over in laughter. Something really important that Joy has taught me is the importance of listening. Really listening. Joy, when I first met you, I'll admit that I had some difficulty being able to understand what you were saying. And looking back, I realized that my reaction was often to simply nod my head along and pretend like maybe I had caught what you had said. And it took me a while before I realized that's what I was doing. And when I did realize that's what I was doing, I guess I realized also that I wasn't actually authentically communicating with you. And so that realization forced me to look deep into myself to try to understand why I was doing that. And I think maybe I was like afraid of having to ask you to repeat yourself, as if I were afraid that might offend you. And then I realized, yeah. But then I realized that you'd probably be more offended that I just kind of dismissed you and what you were saying, rather than if I tried to ask you again to repeat yourself and hear you. And so then I had another realization. I had so many epiphanies with you, Joy. Then I realized I do that all the time with all kinds of people. I often find that I just nod along as if I heard someone instead of stopping to ask them to repeat themselves so that I can actually hear them. So this year, I've really challenged myself to stop doing that, to be a better listener, which means being willing to ask people to repeat themselves and not just pretend that I've heard them and understand fully what they're saying. And the reason I'm doing that is because of you, Joy. So I wanted to say thank you for helping me to do that. And there's one more thing that I also want to say, Joy, about you. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I'm absolutely inspired by your grit. Joy engages in physical therapy regularly, and every Wednesday afternoon I would see her working with a physical therapist. I watched Joy walk around the halls of the house with minimal assistance, and Joy, I was always impressed by how hard you worked that physical therapy. There were days when you finished that you were completely out of breath, sweating, parched. You had clearly given your all, and I admit that, yeah, I was kind of watching you some of those days, kind of like a voyeur. But I have to tell you that I was so totally floored by your grit and your perseverance, and I found it absolutely inspiring. So thank you for that, Joy. Next, I'm going to recognize Katrina. Katrina is the lady seated over here in the beige and brown top and skirt. And one of the things that makes Katrina so amazing, because let me just say, Katrina is amazing, but one of the things that makes her amazing is that she knows just how amazing she is. She owns her amazingness. Katrina takes a compliment better than anyone I know. When you give Katrina a compliment, and let me pause to just say this, that Katrina gets compliments a lot, deservedly so. She gets compliments for her singing, for her ability to read and write in Braille. I tried to learn Braille for a second, and I failed miserably, so she gets compliments for that, for how she leads prayers, the stories she writes, the way she drums. She's an excellent drummer. This is no exaggeration. When I've jammed with Katrina, she holds down a steady beat better than half the drummers that I've ever worked with before. So she is an excellent drummer. Oh, and she's an incredible whistler. I have yet to defeat her in a whistling contest. Someday, I might be able to do that. So as I was saying, there are many reasons why Katrina receives compliments, and she receives them and accepts them so beautifully. What she often says in reply to a compliment is, "Thank you." And that's it. She says it in a way that it's clear to her and clear to you that the compliment is certainly welcomed, but at the same time, not at all necessary. In other words, you're not telling her anything she doesn't already know. It is a beautiful confidence, Katrina, that you display, and I wish I had that same confidence. It's something that I want to thank you for, because you've really taught me the importance of self-confidence. You've modeled for me how to accept compliments with both grace and strength. You've reminded me that it's okay to feel good about my own abilities, and I really appreciate that about you. So, Katrina, I want to thank you for that. Jeff. It looks like Jeff isn't here today, is that correct? Okay. Well, Jeff was the first core member of the Peace House that I met when I started my work there. And as David mentioned to you, kind of ironically and coincidentally, he is a man of few words. In fact, there are days he never says a single word to me at all. If I'm lucky, he'll say hello to me, but more often than not, he'll simply greet me with kind of a long-suffering sigh. It's not that Jeff doesn't like me, at least I don't think so. Of course, he's not here today, so maybe I better go work on my Jeff relationship. It's not that he doesn't like me, I think he's just generally unimpressed by me. And I can't say that I blame him. It was a little disconcerting at first, but I got used to it, and I came to realize that I'm just not necessarily as important to Jeff as his maps, or his illustrated Bible, or his TV shows. And I think it's really worthy of note here that Jeff's favorite movie is The Wizard of Oz, which of course is set in Kansas. His favorite television show is Smallville, which follows the story of Clark Kent before he becomes Superman. So Smallville, of course, is also set in Kansas. Now, as a native Kansan myself, I immediately noted the common denominator in all of Jeff's interests, so I assumed that Jeff must have a connection to Kansas. Turns out he doesn't. Apparently, he is simply a man of refined and discriminating taste. So if Jeff were here, and I'll tell him this in person after the service, but if Jeff were here, what I would say is this. I would say, Jeff, you have taught me something very important this year. You've taught me that being with somebody, sharing space with somebody you care about, doesn't always require filling the air with words. And this was a really hard lesson for me to learn because I like words a lot, as many of you know. I like saying them, writing them, reading them, hearing them. My entire life is words, but Jeff's life is not. And Jeff taught me how to be with someone authentically without relying on words, which sometimes can be nothing more than useless noise. When we first met, I constantly tried to fill the air with my words. I tried to bait Jeff into throwing some of his own words into the air as well, but Jeff wouldn't bite. And I had to learn that that was okay. As I said, it was a hard lesson for me, but I thank Jeff for teaching it to me. I thank him for helping me learn the value of silence, for helping me realize the often unnecessary, unwarranted value I place on words and noise. Jack, I know, was not going to be able to make it here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Jack. Jack also taught me a great deal this year, and he actually has a lot in common with Jeff. They are both men of few words. If I'm lucky to get a sigh from Jeff, I'm equally lucky if I can get an occasional grunt from Jack. Jack has earned my admiration for many, many reasons. Most importantly, because of his work ethic. Jack is a horse. Without complaint. He does several chores around the Peace House and the larger L'Arche community. For example, he collects and carries trash and recycling to and from the houses. He weeds the garden. He helps put up Christmas lights. Jack is always there whenever there is some thankless work to be done. But actually, there's no such thing as thankless work at L'Arche. One of the reasons I love it so much. At L'Arche, thankfulness and gratitude flow like milk and honey. But nevertheless, Jack works tirelessly, without complaint, and with surprising efficiency. When completing a task, he is single-minded in his pursuit of completion. And I also want to note that he has a keen sense of space and direction, which means a lot to me because I have none. The L'Arche campus is fairly large and spread out, yet Jack knows exactly where everything is and how to get there. And on multiple occasions, while I was walking with Jack, I became disoriented in the small wooded area between the houses. Jack knew exactly where we were, so I followed him. And if Jack had not been there to lead me, I would still be in those woods lost today, and you would have had to send in a search party after me, and it probably would have looked like a scene from Naked and Afraid. Jack, to me, epitomizes the salt of the earth kind of person. He reminds me a lot of the old weathered farmers of Kansas that I knew. He's tough and taciturn. He does what needs to be done, not for anyone else, but for himself. He works tirelessly and quietly without expecting any reward, and as such, he really models my idea, my definition of integrity. Last but not least, Viva. Hi, Viva. Viva is one of the most caring and compassionate people I know. Every day, when I first see Viva, she quickly walks toward me, and she gives me a hug and a kiss on the cheek. And I have observed that she does this for every person, every friend that she sees every day. It is like a ritual, but there's nothing routine about it, not for Viva at least. In that moment, when Viva gently embraces you and offers her kiss, you become the center of her universe. There is nothing else on her mind or in her heart, only you. In that magic moment, she is fully present to you and only you, sincerely conveying her deepest respect and affection. Viva, I love the way that you greet people. I have never met anyone who does it better, and it is a gift that I am not ashamed to say I covet. I hope to someday be able to offer such greetings to my friends with all the sincerity and consistency that you show because you love so freely and profusely. And you've taught me in that a really important lesson. When I was growing up in my Christian education and my Christian spiritual formation, I have to be honest, I was really skeptical about the idea of unconditional love for all. That idea never made sense to me. How can you love everyone without condition? Doesn't it cheapen the currency of love when you share it with so many and so freely? And even today, as a Unitarian Universalist, as a minister, I admit I still struggle with the similar idea of recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. Respecting the worth and dignity of every person sometimes seems fake to me or just plain impossible. But Viva, I think that you've proven that I am wrong. You've proven that it can be done. You are the genuine article. You love everyone sincerely without condition or reservation. And in doing so, your love is in no way cheapened. It is no less real or potent or valuable. And so you've given me hope that someday I can love as freely and unconditionally as you. You have truly become a role model for me, and for that I really want to thank you. Volunteering at L'Arche these past several months has become one of my primary spiritual practices. In some ways, I feel like life there is an artificial bubble, a little oasis where I don't have to worry about all the complexities of the real world. But now, I kind of wonder if the so-called real world, if that actually is the artifice, and life at L'Arche is what is, or at least should be, more real. The power and beauty of that community is palpable. Now, it's not perfect. There is darkness and frustration and sadness there, just as there is everywhere else. But the resiliency and the grace with which this community faces that darkness is so compelling. There is a simplicity and a clarity there that makes it the closest thing to that ideal, beloved community that I have ever experienced. We as a church are blessed to have a relationship with L'Arche. It's a relationship that I hope will continue to grow over time. There are many here in this church who have already experienced the magic of L'Arche, and I hope that more of you after today will consider visiting and volunteering there in the future. I know that David will be happy to drive you over there whenever you want. I am a better person because of L'Arche. We are a better church and a better city because of L'Arche. So on behalf of everyone here at UUCJ, to all of you from the L'Arche community, I want to say thank you.